Hi. Okay. I can't hear you. Sorry, everyone. I'm Susan Sonz. I'm going to start. Okay. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Give me a thumbs up if it looks right. It looks right? Okay, good. Hi, everyone. Today, I'm going to talk about the true simillimum, and I'm going to discuss a few examples. I am a big believer. I run the New York School of Homeopathy. I don't know what she told you because for some reason I can't hear Genoveva, but thank you for inviting me. And I run the New York School of Homeopathy. So I'm going to be talking about work that we do in that school. I'm a big believer in what I call the true simillimum. And that is for me that very special remedy that is just for you. And I believe that this remedy will truly cure on all levels. So this special remedy can be any substance on our planet, from plants to minerals to animals. I don't let it worry me about why we all have this special remedy. I just look at it this way. Somehow, for some reason, I think we were all born into this world resonating or connecting to some substance on this planet. So whether that's a daisy or a mosquito or a diamond, somehow unconsciously we register daily information about that substance into our unconscious minds. I don't think we could figure out what the substance is for ourselves because that stored information is unconscious and it has to be released by the homeopath. This idea, though, beautifully follows the law of similars because we are looking for a remedy that is like you. And speaking very simply, if you're like or similar to Calcarea carbonica, for example, then you'll be very concerned with work, safety, and protection. And these are the same things that make a calc carb person feel overwhelmed. You can see the similarity in the source that we use, which is the oyster shell. In order to make that shell that protects the oyster has to work and work and work, making these protective layers of Calcarea carbonica. All natural things made of calc carb have to do with strength and structure and some sort of protection, our teeth, our bones, shells of shellfish, and so on. And this kind of thinking can be applied to anyone who may be similar to any source in our world. And that's why we have so many remedies that are already made, thousands of them. And more substances get made all the time because a patient may end up telling you that they are resonating with something that hasn't been potentized. I myself I've had to have a few sources made into remedies for certain patients. So then, how do I find that true simillimum? And that's what I'm here to talk about. So these are my main methods of case taking. And anyone who has heard me speak knows that I use and I teach various methods of case taking. I call these, first of all, my big ideas method, which then extends into my big ideas, kingdoms, and groupings method. There, I use the sensation method sometimes, and I use something I call the experiential method, which involves getting the patient to reveal the experience of the source of the remedy that they need, using information from the unconscious mind. So let me elaborate. The one that I teach the most in the first year at New York School of Homeopathy is our big ideas method, where I match the big ideas of the patient to the big ideas of a well-known remedy, which is basically the same as repertory work, whether or not I choose to use the repertory. This method makes it easier to teach and learn our famous remedies in the first year. So I'm going to use calcarb as an example again. The big ideas are work, safety, and protection, right? They work in order to be safe. So I call this the third little pig's remedy. If you know that fairy tale where the first pig builds his house of straw, the second pig builds his house of sticks so they can save money and go out and party. And the third little pig spends his money on bricks so he can build a nice, safe home that will protect him from the big bad wolf. So this is how I see Calcarea people. These big ideas are also rubrics. So for the big idea, I only show this so you can see that I can also use the repertory, right? You can use the rubric mind industrious mania for work, or you can use mind work aggravates because it does. They work so hard. The resulting big idea of being overwhelmed, you can use the rubric mind handle things cannot anymore overwhelmed by stress. So these rubrics end up, being the same as the big ideas. Another big idea is security with the rubric mind anxiety about the future. Or you can use other rubrics like mind fear something will happen. And for the big idea of protection, there's a rubric, mind protection constantly wants mother's protection, or mind delusions, imaginations, home away from is. And this helps to describe how important home is, that oyster shell, for a calc-carb person. You can use rubrics with this method, and I teach my students how to do that, but with experience, you don't actually need the repertory. Because if you know your well-known remedies and you understand the big ideas of the patient, then you just match the big ideas of the remedy to the big ideas of the patient. So then I extend this concept to big ideas, kingdoms, groupings, and subgroupings in order to find less familiar remedy sources. So I mean by kingdom, plant, mineral, or animal kingdoms. And to further explain very, very, very briefly, mineral folks will talk about structure, safety, protection, order, or the lack of these things. And plant people will speak about their sensitivities. They're very sensitive to things, people, the environment. And the animal kingdom people will describe their issues with survival because it's a dog eat dog world, right? So that's how animals react to everything. They're always sort of on alert. Again, it's a total oversimplification, but I want to illustrate how we work. At the New York School of Homeopathy, we study as many groupings as possible. For instance, we study mammals, sea remedies, spiders, all of these groupings, snakes, insects, plant families, drug remedies, mineral groupings like the periodic table rows, gases, acids, all of these groupings have big ideas of their own that helps you recognize the grouping for a patient. For instance, if we're talking about the snake grouping, right? You look first for the subgrouping. You recognize animal, you recognize snake, and then you're looking, is it a constrictor snake or is it a poisonous snake? And then there's subgroupings like which genera. And hopefully after you bring it down, you find the exactly correct snake remedy for the patient. So sometimes I use the sensation method, which was developed by Rajan Sankaran because he understood that the patient has unconscious information that they may reveal through certain words and gestures that are connected to the source that they need. So a quick illustration, and I'm not doing sensation justice today, I'm just giving a quick illustration. It would be the Solanaceae plant family, where the patient will talk about intense fears and violence, even terror. You may have already determined that this patient needs a plant remedy. because they've spoken about their oversensitivity to many things and many people. And then you recognize the words that are connected to the Solanaceae plant family, those words about violence, terror, and fear. And then if you consider the miasm, which because everything comes on very suddenly for them, you realize it's the acute miasm. And then you'll be able to see the specific remedy, stramonium. As you can see, the big ideas groupings method overlaps in all of these case-taking methods that I use. So these methods are not very dissimilar, but each has its own specific usefulness. My favorite method, I have to say, because it's very exciting when it happens, is what I call the experiential case-taking method. And I developed this method largely through the work of Divya Chabra, who showed us how to use the patient's 5 senses to extract source information from the patient's unconscious mind, which then will reveal the experience of the source that the patient needs. With this method, if the patient is willing and able, not everybody can do this, we look for the experience of the source. So, for instance, I had a patient who described the experience of being a turtle. She described being slow and prodding and dragging her hands through the dirt. She described pulling in to hide from the danger, needing the protection of a small space, which of course would be the shell. Very often the patient will at some point say the name of the remedy that they need, but they don't really understand why they've said it. These cases are always so fascinating to watch and experience. All of these examples are from actual cases of mine, but these examples are oversimplified just to give you an idea of how I take cases and how I look for the true simillimum. So I'm going to give a couple more examples because I promised to do so. I want to talk about a big ideas example. And the way I feel is it's really a lucky day when a nice, normal patient comes in with the big ideas of a well-known remedy. It doesn't happen that often, but when it does, it feels like a gift because it's a remedy you know and you feel so sure it's going to work. But once I had a very serious man who came in and he was depressed and anxious. He was worried about work and his family. He's a very responsible guy, and somehow, recently, it was too much for him. And now he was having panic attacks and depression, and the depression was making him want to commit suicide. He was waking up in the early morning with panic attacks. And then he would get depressed, and the depression was making him want to commit suicide. When I asked him, anyhow, the panic attacks, were so overwhelming that he would be depressed for the rest of the day. So when he talked to me about suicide, I asked him, why haven't you tried it? And he said, because it wouldn't be very nice to my family. So without even going to the repertory, if you just look at the patient's big ideas of being serious, responsible, worried about business and family, anxious, panic attacks, depression, and suicidal longings. But he would not kill himself because he felt too responsible to his family. And then if you remember the big ideas of the remedy natrum sulfuricum, now you see how these big ideas match. And if you made a clipboard in the repertory, it would also come out natrum sulf. And that's how this method works. My younger son is also a good example of this method. From birth, he had recurring respiratory and ear infections. And as a toddler, he did pretty well on calc carb. His big ideas for a little guy really fit calc carb because he was very cautious and careful, and he would work very intently even when he was playing with a toy. He had lots of fears, and his favorite place was home, near me. He physically improved on calc carb, but his way of seeing himself in the world continued in this same way. So he continued to be cautious and fearful, even though he had a lot of friends. But at a very young age, he started to get severe growing pains. He was growing so fast that he had stretch marks across his knees. He was only 7 years old. So I switched him to Calcarea phosphoricum because one, it's a Calcarea remedy, and he had already done well on a Calcarea remedy. But two, because it was our most famous growing pains remedy. This remedy was totally life-changing for him. I should have seen that remedy before, because one of the ways that he felt most secure in life was when he was with his friends, which is so phosphorus-like. He's now 32 years old. He's 6'5" tall, which I think is about 2 meters, or a little under 2 meters. And this is why he had such bad growing pains, because he's very tall. But he still uses calc phos whenever he happens to get sick, which isn't very often. So now for big ideas, kingdoms, groupings, subgroupings kind of case, I have a Tarantula hispanica case. 20 years ago, I saw a woman who was recently diagnosed with lupus. She said, 2 weeks ago, my whole body swelled up. Even my face was swollen. I was swollen all over. You couldn't even see my bones. My knees, my hips, everything hurt. I'm okay sitting, but I'm bad walking, especially up and down stairs. She showed me her swollen red wrists and ankles, and she couldn't dance anymore, and dancing was her favorite hobby. Everything hurt on her, her jaw, her head, her eyes. She had itching all over with burning pimples. She said, I used to do ballet and flamenco twice a week, but now I can hardly move. It all happened so fast. So there were plenty of symptoms to look up. But if I'd gone to the repertory, I doubt a remedy would have come up because a lot of her symptoms were very typical for lupus. So I'd be sort of repertorizing a disease. So before I even did a clipboard, I looked at her main ideas. She was super industrious, very loquacious, fast talking, and loved dancing. She's little and quick, very busy, very cheerful when she's not sick, and has that animal kingdom energy. So then if we look up generalities dancing ameliorates, tarantula has the strongest value along with sepia. But her tubercular nature was not like sepia at all, nor were her other big ideas. And this is the way I use this big ideas kingdom groupings and subgroupings method. In other words, first I selected kingdom. Since she spoke with many of the words from the animal kingdom, like survival and confrontations between herself and other people, and her competitiveness, right? She ran a restaurant, she wanted to have the best restaurant. So I picked the animal kingdom. Then I considered the way she was running around, always busy, always moving, very productive, super chilly, very restless, and she loved to dance. Because of these big ideas, I could have assumed that she was either an insect or a spider, as they both share a lot of the characteristics, but her busyness and her industriousness was very successful like a spider's, as opposed to the chaotic energy of an insect. So that's how I picked the grouping of spiders. There was never enough time in the day for her. She was very clever, very intense. And of course, it was her huge love of dance. So it brought me to spider instead of insect. And then I was able to do a clipboard, which clearly showed tarantula. But keep in mind, it could have been any spider. In her case, tarantula worked beautifully, and all of her symptoms went away. And over this last 20 years, every few years, she might have a slight relapse. She feels it coming back. And then she takes a remedy and it straightens her right out again. So the sensation method example is a little more difficult to explain if you don't know the sensation method, but I'm going to do my best here. This was a good sensation case because sensation-wise, this woman gestured and spoke all of the words of the lilium, the lily plant family. She had very painful acne that she would squeeze, and she described it as squeezing and trying to extrude this stuff out, which are exactly the words that are listed in Sankaran's schema. She also described her nose obstruction the same way, that she feels like it's squeezing, like trying to push a very large object out of a very small hole. So for me, at this point, the Lily family was obvious. But which Lily did she need? And then she started to explain that she wanted to have a sexual relationship with another woman. And she was feeling really guilty about it. And she felt that God would be angry with her if she did. She'd been brought up in a very strict religious family. So, of course, that's the well-known keynote of Lilium Tigrinum rubric, religious complaints alternating with sexual excitement. My students had just seen a seminar with Rajan about sensation. And because of this, they were all able to pick the Lilium Tigrinum simply based on her words that were in schema, talking about her acne and nose. They had not yet studied the remedy Lilium Tigrinum, and so I ended up picking the same remedy that they did, coming from a different direction. And this is, to me, the best confirmation of a homeopathic remedy. So, by the way, all of her acne went away, her nose obstruction cleared up, and she did begin a relationship with that woman conflict-free. So all these cases are super abbreviated. I usually spend 2 to 3 hours with each client, but I'm simply using these as brief examples of true simillimum cases. So now I'm going to briefly describe a case that Genoveva finds interesting. And this is a woman who came in because she was having trouble just living her life. She found everything bewildering because of what she called her constant anxiety and her uncomfortable feelings. She didn't like attending any kind of event, despite the fact that she was an artist, and she had to attend openings and other events. She got into a state whenever she entered a room with people. So when she was asked, "How does that feel?" she said, "It makes me feel scattered. I feel all over the place." So then when she was asked, "How does scattered feel?" she said, "I feel like those little metal shavings that you gather together with a magnet." Oh my God, that was in the first 15 minutes of her case. And she went on to describe much more about herself and said more things that related to the energy of a magnet. She said that when she had to speak to someone at an event, she felt there was a cushion of air, like an energy between them, pushing them apart. And she showed it like this, and then she went like this. And that's what it's like when you try to push two magnets with the same pole facing each other. We took this case twice because no one else in the group saw a magnet the way I did. But in the second intake, she described it very clearly in different ways, and everybody saw it. So here she is. She said it in the first 15 minutes. We spent basically 6 hours with her. She didn't know what she was talking about, but she was just describing the way she feels. So that's the experience of magnetic energy. She kept talking about energy and all these bubbles she feels everywhere. After this remedy, she calmed down. She moved back to California, and she actually had a baby. The baby's now 10 years old, but the last time I spoke to her, she told me she still takes the remedy whenever she starts to feel that uncomfortable sensation, and then she calms down again. She said, "I cannot thank you enough for giving me the life I now have. I know I could never have had a child if I stayed in that condition." So that's the way we work in order to find the true simillimum, but I wanted to finish by talking about the first aphorism of the organon. The physician's highest and only calling is to make the sick healthy, to cure, as it is called. This first aphorism is simplicity at its very best, but it's a deep concept. We're not supposed to simply make someone feel a little bit better. We are supposed to cure. And if we keep that intention in mind, then we will be finding the true simillimum for our patients, and the patients can be cured, and they can go on to lead fulfilling and happy lives. If we keep this intention in mind, we homeopaths will always do good work. So my advice is to take the case the way that seems appropriate for each individual patient. Be alert, be patient, and give them space. Getting the right remedy isn't about what people consciously like or don't like. Instead, you need to hear some information that comes from a less conscious place. So you have to keep going with the patient until you know they're done, until you know you've heard the experience of the source they need one way or another. And retake the case if necessary. I love retaking cases because the patient is already warmed up and they go to the source even easier. Take the case until you find the true simillimum. And then all you have to worry about is proper management of the case. But of course, close management and careful dosing are crucial to a successful cure. It all comes down to this for me. Just look for the true simillimum. No matter what the pathology is, no matter what method of case taking you use, just go for the simillimum. It sounds so simple, but I often need to remind myself of this simplicity. I don't use homeotherapeutics, where practitioners are treating the disease or the symptoms of the disease. Instead, I treat the patient as Hahnemann said we should. He taught us to treat the totality of the patient, not the disease. He taught us that the beauty of homeopathy is that it treats the whole person on all levels, physical, emotional, and mental. It's all about balance, and it's all about the true simillimum. Chronic cases require us to really see the individual and see how they perceive themselves in the world, so we can clearly see and choose the right remedy for that person. So when I'm seeing a patient, I'm trying to understand how they perceive themselves in the world. And if I succeed in finding a remedy that matches them and matches that perception, then that patient can let go of that perception, which has been limiting their approach to life. If that happens, it's inevitable that profound change will occur on all levels, physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual levels. And when we get to the right remedy, it's as if you have heard some incredibly profound information that you've always needed to hear. I always say that taking a good remedy is like someone whispering in your ear and telling you something very, very simple that you've always needed to know, but you have never heard it before. And then, after that profundity, you'll never be the same. And for most of us, that's a very good thing. So thank you for your attention. Thank you, Genoveva. I'm sorry I can't hear you. But I appreciate the opportunity. I can, let me end the show. Stop sharing. Okay. I can put the school website in the chat. And if you have any questions, you can reach us through there. All right. I'm sorry I can't hear you. I don't know why. I was able to hear all the other panelists, so. But I thank you. Okay.